This is William K. Murtaugh, Witness 1. And as you people know, I made a phone call to the Secret Service live on the air on my Murdathon on October 10th. And the High Command, too, made a series of posts on their Twitter account as well as on the Timothy Charles Homeseth blog. Well, this video is going to address this false accusation. And we're going to go through everything in regards to the phone call and the facts that led to the phone call. And point by point, we are going to show the High Command where they are dead wrong when it comes to the statements that they have made on social media. Now, to get us to where we are, what I want to address is what led up to this phone call. On October 8th, there had been a series of posts made regarding a death threat against the President of the United States as well as to Mr. Homeseth himself. The title was Death Threat Made to Donald Trump and Family. This is not a game. And if you go down, there was here is IP address, and the IP address is given along with the email. Now, because of this and a series of posts that had been made prior to this one, implicating a person that also is purported to do child rescue, I felt it my civic duty to contact the United States Secret Service and bring this matter to their attention. And I also pointed out to the Secret Service that the original accusation about there being a death threat was made on June 18, 19, and 20. Well, actually, between 18 and 19, and had apparently not been reported. And so on October 10th, when I saw these series of posts about a threat to the life of the President of the United States, I reported it. I also happened to do this while online. Now, because I did this on the internet and recorded it, the High Command made a false accusation that I had violated the Florida wiretapping law. Now, High Command 2 went on to say that Murtaugh not only violated Florida's wiretapping statute by recording the call without the consent or other party, which he did with two different people from the Secret Service during the call, which is a felony, but he lied to the Secret Service about details. Now, let's go over from an article that was written in the blog now owned by the High Command in Mr. Homeseth's name regarding these so-called points. Now, in the headline on the TACH blog that was written on October 11th, the headline reads, "Attention, U.S. Secret Service. Florida man live streams false information to SS regarding death threat against President Trump." Okay, so let us look at this article and go line by line to see exactly where the so-called false information was present. In the lead to the article, it says, Murtaugh made the call regarding a published article, corresponding YouTube video about a death threat that was made against President Trump and his family. The original article was published in June of 2020. Murtaugh phoned the U.S. Secret Service to report that he observed a link to the story and a YouTube video on the Twitter account The High Command was originally published on timothycharleshomeseth.com. That part is basically true. This was an article that was written 4 months prior to it being republished on the Twitter account of the High Command and a video that was put up on YouTube. And there are quite a few mistakes, as I'm going to go over. They're not mistakes, it's deliberate misinformation. Now, in this particular statement here, High Command states, quote, "I have been named as part of the people making this threat, so it puts my safety at risk because they are spreading this information around," Murtaugh told the Secret Service. Murtaugh's claim that he has been named as part of the people that are making the threat is completely false. Now, here is the problem with that. For the past several years, Timothy Charles Homeseth, the High Command Task Force, Randy Lynn Erickson, and others have accused me of being part of the so-called Pizzagate conspiracy group, or Picasso Gate as she calls it. I've been accused of being a media spokesperson for pedophile trafficking. I've been accused of all sorts of things. The record is in the timothycharleshomeseth.com blog itself. Now we're going to go into a little bit more regarding how this statement stating that what I said is false immediately after this particular slide, because it's this in this next slide that the task force contradicts themselves. On this paragraph in the blog article, task force states that nobody has been named regarding the threat. The original story about the death threat against President Trump was made via a comment on timothycharleshomeseth.com, and the person who made the threat has never been identified, nor has there been any suggestion that Murtaugh made the threat. That's partly correct. However, task force makes a bit of a contradictory statement farther down in the article. And as we progress on the presentation here, I will get into details of why At the very least, High Command's statements are at best misleading, if not downright false. Okay, in this next portion of the article, it is stated, quote, Murtaugh lied and proactively implicated himself where he previously had not been mentioned. During last night's live stream, Murtaugh proudly reminded everybody in his chat room, which is believed to be an online discussion forum for members of an international child trafficking operation, that the U.S. Secret Service takes every single call seriously and acts on every call. Now, right here, in this paragraph, I am implicated as being somehow part of an international child trafficking operation. Now, remember those words, because this is going to be important as we go along in this presentation, that I am accused of being part of an international child trafficking operation. Anybody that's followed the High Command, anybody that's followed TimothyCharlesHolmseth.com knows very well that I have been accused of all sorts of things. But you're going to see as we go through this very article that was written repudiating that I am not implicated in this particular death threat, how High Command contradicted themselves. Okay, in the next section of this blog entry, High Command wrote, quote, they'll track Timmy down, Murtaugh said, referring to Timothy Charles Holmseth. Timothy Charles Holmseth is the news reporter that published information about the threat in June of 2020. Mert then contradicted what he said only moments before and revealed his true motive for making the report to the Secret Service. I encourage everybody to call into the U.S. Secret Service, because the more calls they get about this thing, the more they are going to be inclined to do something about it, Murtaugh said. Now, apparently, this so-called High Command, who's supposed to be closely connected to the government, doesn't even know how the government works. And I have stated this before in previous videos on other matters. The squeaky wheel gets the grease is an old saying here, and it applies to this particular claim. Because one person reporting a threat, which is probably going to sound like a hoax to the Secret Service, may not get a lot of attention. But if you get 10, 20, 30, 40 people calling in, the U.S. Secret Service is going to be inclined to do something about it. And what the U.S. Secret Service is going to do is they are going to find whoever owns the High Command, and they are also going to find Mr. Holmseth himself, if he's still alive, and ask him about this report. And one thing they're probably going to ask him is this. You are claiming that this incident happened in June of 2020. This is October of 2020. And the only report that has been made to our office is by Mr. Murtaugh. You have not reported this. The High Command has not reported this. Why? It would be simple enough to call us and report the incident. You did not do that. Why? And why publish this threat on social media if you are not going to report it? This is what I meant when I made that statement. Now, apparently, in order to get through the thick head of the High Command, I have to make this absolutely clear, because they are not comprehending the English language for whatever reason. Task Force said this a little bit farther down. During his report to the Secret Service, Murtaugh told the agent Timothy Holmseth is part of QAnon. Quote, he is a very unstable individual and obsessed with the Trumps. Close quote, Murtaugh said. Murtaugh told the agent he has spoken with his local law enforcement in Florida and the local FBI in Florida about the situation, and I have. Now, why do I call Timothy Charles Holmseth an unstable individual? Which is my opinion. They have made statements about me and my personal background and about accusing me of being unstable, so fair is fair. But let's get to the point here. Timothy Charles Holmseth claims to be third in line to the President of the United States. And the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force is supposed to be the vehicle in which he gets the information passed through Donald Trump personally, and he publishes this information directly from the President of the United States on his blog and social media. There's a problem here. Timothy Charles Holmseth is an unemployed former pizza delivery driver. The last time he was heard from, which was the end of May of this year, he was living in his car with all his personal belongings stuffed into the car, which makes him basically homeless. And this is supposed to be the person that is one person removed from the President of the United States getting all this important information about a major international effort to end child trafficking, blood sacrifices, all this other nonsense. And also, Timothy Charles Holmseth has made it abundantly clear that he is part of QAnon. There was a newspaper article written where he had QAnon on the back window of an old car that he used to drive. And there are references to QAnon all over his social media accounts. So, one is fundamentally true and the other is an opinion. And yes, I have talked to my local FBI, plus the FBI in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have also talked to my local law enforcement. Because when you go around accusing somebody of being a pedophile, and you accuse somebody of being a child trafficker and being part of an organization that sells babies for people to eat the blood and all this other stuff, there are going to be some radical right-wing people out there that are going to get mad, and I am now feeling that my life is in danger because of this very specific reason. The incident in Michigan is a primary example. Right-wing terrorists tried to kidnap the governor of the state of Michigan because they have their panties in a wad about wearing masks. And it's these kind of people that follow Mr. Holmseth, and I will be getting into that on my series. But let us move on. Now, this is where things get a little interesting, and this is an important point which I will get to later on in this presentation. High Command states the following. Murtaugh is part of what he publicly rolled out as Operation Chaos, which he is running in conjunction with Hillary's former bodyguard Craig Sawyer, who set up a very heavily armed paramilitary operation in Arizona under the guise of a fake child rescue group called Veterans for Child Rescue. Sawyer is operating a domestic terror group, which he said he created in April 2017 with a, quote, top of the FBI, close quote. Now, right off the bat, this is a false statement. Operation Chaos was a name I gave to the documentary where I went to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and over to Plum City, Wisconsin, and spent roughly 4.5 to 5 days basically going to points of interest that had to do with the saga of Timothy Charles Holmseth, Field McConnell, and a few other people. Craig Sawyer had nothing to do with this. I have no affiliation with Craig Sawyer up until recently when I was forced to do so. I have had no contact with Craig Sawyer. He does his thing, and it seems to be that Tim Holmseth has a problem with Mr. Sawyer. He's had problems with Mr. Sawyer for years, and it's because he's competition. Now, I don't know anything about Mr. Sawyer or how he conducts himself, and I don't care. And for whatever reason, like he's done in the past, Mr. Holmseth has dragged me into whatever it is Mr. Sawyer is doing, just like he did with the Haley Cummings case. I had no part of that case. I wasn't interested in that case, and I wound up getting dragged into it anyway. So, right here, the high command has just contradicted herself, because now I am accused of being affiliated with a, quote, domestic terror group that is supposedly fake when it comes to rescuing children. Now, this is just one part of how this all fits together, and I'll get into this when I get my second part, which is going to deal directly with this accusation regarding me and Craig Sawyer. In August of 2020, according to High Command, Sawyer threatened Timothy Holmseth via interstate electronics communication using the same communication method as the person who sent the death threat against Donald Trump, President Trump. Okay, right here, the High Command is making the tie to this particular accusation and the accusation that happened back in June. Now, this is roughly 2 months, a little less than 2 months. Well, actually it's July, August. So we're looking at 2 months. It is 2 months since the June article. And if you look at Timothy Charles Holmseth's blog, you are going to notice something. When you look at the header of Timothy Charles Holmseth's blog, you will notice that he's categorized the header with all kinds of reference material. In the bottom right-hand corner is the name Craig Sawyer-Black Operator. Now, this is a way for people to find specific people that he is targeting and specific subjects which he talks about. Directly left of that is me. He likes to call me Filthy Mert. He just, for whatever reason, he just decided to call me names, even though it is alleged that he was fired from a janitor's job of all things because he wouldn't take a bath. But, it is what it is. When you click on the hyperlink for Craig Sawyer, you find yourself going to a multitude of articles about Mr. Sawyer going back a very long time. Mr. Holmseth has been, quote, after Craig Sawyer since at a minimum February on this particular blog, and for a couple of years over on his Facebook. So Mr. Sawyer has been target number one. And what is also interesting to look at is when some of these articles were written about Mr. Sawyer. And as it turns out, Holmseth had done articles on Craig Sawyer in April of 2020, July 17th, 2020, which was almost to the day after the first accusation had been made about the death threat against Trump, and again in July 2020. And, we get into August where the article was made where Craig Sawyer is accused of making a death threat against Tim Holmseth that was similar to the death threat made back in June of 2020. So that is directly tying Craig Sawyer on Tim Homeseth's blog with the death threat against President Trump. And since Tim Homeseth insists on associating me with Craig Sawyer, he's accusing me of being part of this somehow, because if I'm part of Craig Sawyer's little operation, I would be an accessory after the fact. That's the way these things work. So that is the connection. But there's an even stronger one as we go on. Now, this next part of the blog article is rather interesting, and it goes like this. As part of Operation Chaos, Murtaugh recently traveled by air from Florida to Minnesota to meet with the Minneapolis FBI, East Grand Forks Police Department, Polk County, Minnesota Court Administration, Elk River, Minnesota Police Department, and others. And yes, I did. That was the primary purpose of my trip. I was doing a documentary, and it was important for me to talk to these places, because some rather interesting comments had been made regarding the status of Mr. Homeseth and the warrant for his arrest. It was falsely reported that the warrant had either A, been expunged, which it has been not, or B, that the arrest warrant was only good for a 150-mile radius from the Polk County Courthouse in Minnesota, and that the arrest warrant was only good in that radius in the state of Minnesota. These statements were false, and by visiting both the Elk River Police Department and the Polk County Court Administrator Office, I verified that, number one, the arrest warrant for Timothy Charles Homeseth is current and is statewide in the entire state of Minnesota, and that he will be arrested when he is spotted, and that any law enforcement agency within the state of Minnesota has the authority to arrest Mr. Homeseth on the spot. And did I visit the FBI? Yes, I did. That was the reason for my trip to begin with. I was asked by the Wisconsin FBI that if I was in the area, if I would stop by and talk to them. And I said, well, let me see what I can do. I arranged to go up there at my own expense. I did the documentary, and I also talked to the FBI. So that part of it is true. Now, the next paragraph is rather weird. In the Operation Chaos video published by Murtaugh, he showed himself physically staking out the UPS store in Elk River, Minnesota, where he hoped he would see Homeseth getting his mail. Well, again, Mr. Homeseth is a fugitive from justice. He is wanted by the authorities. It came out that Mr. Homeseth is using the UPS store as a mailing address, so it would be only logical that Mr. Homeseth would be going there to pick up his mail. The UPS store is a public operation. It's a business. It's in a public location. There is no law against going in there and asking these people if they have seen Mr. Homeseth and showing them the folder along with the arrest warrant. Now, it turns out that Tim Homeseth has been in that store at one time. Rather curious thing I found out talking to the Elk River Police Department. But I'll get into that at another time. But this is a valid thing to be doing. You're looking for someone that is wanted by the authorities. You're going to go to a public place where he may show up, and if you see him, you get on the phone and you call the police. Pretty logical, I think. Now, in the end of this particular article, the paragraph goes as follows. Murtaugh posted homemade reward posters for Homeseth, which Sawyer then started publishing on Twitter as part of Operation Chaos. And then down here we have a hyperlink to learn more about Craig Sawyer, who's been accused of child sex trafficking and being a pedophile. Click here to learn more about William K. Murtaugh, who has been implicated by significant evidence as being a child rapist, murderer, and serial killer. Now, it's this last paragraph that's very important. These are the accusations that Mr. Homseth is levying against me. He's accusing me of 3 separate, very serious accusations or activities: child rapist, murderer, and serial killer. Now, there are a lot of vigilantes running around. There's a lot of vigilantes right here in the state of Florida. And this stuff is being put on Twitter, it's being put on YouTube, it's being put on social media, and people read this, and they are going to go out and they are going to seek revenge. Now, you see post after post on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube that pedophiles deserve the death penalty. And part of the QAnon group that Mr. Homseth, the High Command, Randy Lynn Erickson, and others are a part of is a group that wants to have their own system of justice. They want to take people down to Gitmo, they want to put them on a kangaroo trial, and then they want to execute them. And so this paragraph alone is the reason my safety and security is in jeopardy. Because Tim Homseth is not law enforcement. Tim Homseth is not a professional reporter. He's not affiliated with any newspaper. He is a man living out of his car with all his personal belongings in it, making these wild accusations about a number of people and getting his facts completely wrong. And to get to the final part of this particular article is something else that needs to be pointed out. The signs that is in this article were not made by me. They were made by an anonymous group that has got a Facebook page that is posting these reward posters because, again, Timothy Charles Homseth is a fugitive for justice. He has an arrest warrant out for his arrest. There is such a thing as a citizen's arrest, but all these people are asking for that run that particular Facebook site is that if you see Mr. Homseth, you are to call the police. If the police arrest him, you will get a $5,000 reward. Period. All I did was pass the things around. Now, Mr. Homseth, if he thinks he's guilty, should have gone to court and proven his innocence. But he won't, because he doesn't believe in the United States Constitution and he doesn't believe in the United States court system. He believes in militias, vigilantism, violence, and so on and so forth. That has been proven by the actions that have been going on with this group, and is one of the reasons that I am doing the QAnon series, which I will be getting into at a later time. Okay, what we're going to pay attention to in these various posts that I'm going to be putting up are times. Now, in this first post, we notice that it was posted at 1:04 p.m. October 8th, 2000. And this is the one where Hillary's guy, Craig Sawyer, is forced to admit his plan to grab kids in dead of night. Now, I don't know the context of the story. I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in here is the timeline. So let's go to the next post that was made on. Now, on this next slide, we are looking at 5:39 p.m. on October 8th, and U.S. Secret Service, Craig Sawyer believed to pose a severe and credible threat to President Trump, and we have a link to the Timothy Charles Homseth blog. Now, pay attention to both the time in what's being said here. Craig Sawyer is being accused of being a clear and credible threat to President Trump, who was supposed to be in Fort Lauderdale, Florida on that date. Now, again, we are seeing a post of Craig Sawyer on October 8th, 2020 at 9:02 p.m. A member of Craig Sawyer's Operation Chaos, James Comey, was John Doe number 2. Now, again, this Craig Sawyer is not part of Operation Chaos. That is simply the title of the documentary series I made. Now, what is important to understand here is that over the course of October 8th, both a blog and tweet about Craig Sawyer was written on social media, primarily on Twitter. At 1:04 p.m., we have the first post about Craig Sawyer. At 3:03 p.m. on October 8th, we have a blog written about Craig Sawyer. 5:09 p.m. is another blog, or is another tweet about Craig Sawyer. At 9:02 p.m., we have another tweet about Craig Sawyer, and at 9:24 p.m. the death threat against Donald Trump is published, stating that someone is using a IP address similar to one that Craig Sawyer is accused of sending in August. So we got June, August, and then October 8th with all these articles hitting the internet, accusing Craig Sawyer of being some kind of assassin, that Donald J. Trump's life is in danger because Craig Sawyer is going to be in Fort Lauderdale or Pennsylvania or has been in Oklahoma. And then on top of everything else, we have Craig Sawyer within 22 minutes of the last article about Craig Sawyer, this death threat made to Donald Trump and family. This is not a game. This is called pattern recognition. There's a pattern being set up here. You have all these articles about Craig Sawyer on this Twitter account alone. I'm not counting the other Twitter accounts. I'm not counting all the YouTubes that were made that day. That's tying Craig Sawyer directly to these accusations by the task force. And the task force is tying me into Craig Sawyer's organization because of my Operation Chaos, which Craig Sawyer had nothing to do with. This is why when I called the Secret Service, I told them that I am personally in danger because of the stuff that's being put out there. And in the article alone about accusing me of making false statements in the call to the Secret Service, task force gets into accusing me of being a part of this group. So she contradicted herself. And this is why I made the statement that I did. Because if you go through Timothy Charles Holmes' blog and you read the filthy murk that's there, and especially the end where they put down that I'm accused of being a pedophile and a stalker and a serial killer and all this other nonsense, it ties in. That is the part I'm talking about. My life is in danger because they're accusing me of being a serial killer. Simple fact. Words mean things. And now we get to the final point, and that is that I was accused of making an illegal phone call. Task Force at 6 o'clock p.m. on October 11th made the following statement. Penalties for illegally recording calls in Florida. Recording calls without the consent of all parties will be prosecuted as a criminal charge, and you may also be subject to a civil lawsuit for damages by an injured party. See Florida Statute Chapter 934.03 for full information. Well, there's a problem with that task force. I didn't call and record the Florida Secret Service office. Apparently, you were not paying attention. I called the Washington, D.C. office of the Secret Service. Washington, D.C. is a single-party state. You do not have to have both parties consent to record a call. It's a single party. So if either party on the call consents to the recording, that's it. Now, I suggest people go over and read some of the entries where Tim Holmseth claims to have talked to people from Florida and have recordings of them. Mr. Stubbs and some others. There's a problem. Mr. Stubbs is a resident of the state of Florida. Florida is a two-party state. So, Timothy Charles Holmseth is guilty of the very crime that I'm being accused of by the task force. So, task force is basically just given evidence that Timothy Charles Holmseth is guilty of a felony. Ain't that neat, as Monty would say. Now, in the future, I'm going to be going into some other things in regards to this situation as time rolls on. Right now, I'm limited as to what I can say and do by request of law enforcement. But there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. And if I were the task force, I would think long and hard before putting anything else on the internet. You're welcome to do it. And in closing, task force and the high command also made statements that Tim Holmseth is alive, and they have yet to prove it. Again, Tim Holmseth hasn't been seen since June. So if Tim Holmseth is alive, it'd be kind of nice to prove it. And as you can tell, there is absolute verifiable proof of Mr. Holmseth being alive. We can only assume that he is deceased, and there may be foul play suspected. So, if you want to keep up to date on anything more having to do with this situation, please like, subscribe, share these videos, and the link to my YouTube channel. Until then, this is William K. Murtaugh, Witness 1. Have a good one.